The interruption. The wedding hall glowed with warm yellow lights, soft music drifting through the air as guests whispered with excitement, everyone waiting for Daniel to finally say his vows and begin a new chapter of his life. But no one expected the moment to freeze in the middle of his smile. No one expected the doors at the back to swing open with a sharp thud. And no one expected a 12-year-old boy to walk straight down the aisle with fear in his eyes and courage in his heart. As he called out for his father, Ethan's voice did not sound loud, yet it cut through the entire hall and made every head turn. His small shoes tapping on the marble floor as he pushed through shocked adults who could not understand why a child looked so determined on the happiest day of his father's life. Daniel felt his breath stop when he saw his son standing there, cheeks flushed, hands shaking, but eyes steady in a way he had never seen before. And he stepped forward a little, confused, worried, already knowing deep inside that this was not a childish interruption, but something serious, something that demanded attention. Vanessa, the bride, stood beside him in her white dress, holding her bouquet with a soft smile that did not match the tension rising around them, her eyes narrowing just for a second before she relaxed her face again, as if nothing could ruin her perfect moment. But Ethan walked right past the guests and stopped only a few steps away from his father, breathing hard as if he had run all the way from the outside world to deliver a truth too heavy for his young shoulders. The hall fell silent in a way that felt unnatural. Even the music faded as if the instruments themselves sensed that something huge was about to unfold, something that would not let this wedding continue the way everyone expected. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he kept his head high and said he needed to talk to his dad right now, that it was important, that it could not wait until after the ceremony. People exchanged confused looks, some smiling awkwardly because they believed it was just nerves or jealousy or childish fear of losing a parent. But Daniel saw the intensity in his son's face and stepped closer, feeling his heart twist with worry. He asked Ethan softly what was wrong, but Ethan shook his head and said, "Not here, not in front of everyone. Please come with me for just 5 minutes. Please listen before you sign anything you cannot take back." Vanessa let out a small laugh, the kind meant to ease tension, and said the boy was just overwhelmed, that weddings can confuse children, that maybe he needed a moment to calm down. But her smile felt too practiced, too controlled, like someone adjusting a mask that was slipping. Ethan turned toward her, and for the first time in his life he spoke to an adult with a firmness that made everyone straighten in their seats. He said he knew what she had been doing. He had seen things she thought no one would ever find, and he had proof, real proof, the kind that could not be ignored or explained away. Daniel's eyes widened with confusion, his mind trying to understand what his son was saying, trying to make sense of the fear mixed with responsibility on that young face. The whispers started slowly, spreading through the hall like a wave, guests murmuring about what the child might have discovered, wondering what could force a boy to interrupt something so important. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her bouquet, just slightly but enough for Ethan to notice, and he felt a cold shiver move down his spine because that small gesture confirmed his fear that she was not surprised, not scared, only annoyed that her perfect plan was being interrupted. Daniel finally reached his son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, feeling how tense the boy was, how hard his heart was beating, and he asked again what was happening, if someone had hurt him, if something terrible had happened outside. Ethan shook his head and stepped back a little, his voice trembling but determined as he said, "Dad, please trust me, I would never ruin your wedding unless I had a reason. You need to know who she really is. You need to see what I found before you say I do, because if you say it now, your whole life will change in a way you cannot fix later." The guests stared. The officiant stood frozen with his book still open, and even the photographers lowered their cameras because the atmosphere no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like the calm before a storm. Vanessa stepped forward with a gentle look, reaching toward Ethan as if to comfort him, telling him that everything was fine and he was just scared. But Ethan stepped back quickly, refusing to let her touch him. And that moment alone made several people in the room shift uncomfortably. Daniel looked at Vanessa, searching her face, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that did not match the woman he thought he loved. Something hidden, sharp, and defensive. Ethan took a deep breath, lifting his chin, and said that he had one chance to stop a mistake, one chance to save his father from someone dangerous, and if he had to stand in front of the whole world to do it, he would. The hall felt tight with tension, people leaning forward to hear the next word, waiting for the truth that had brought a child to the center of a wedding. And Daniel felt his pulse quicken as he realized this moment would decide everything. His future, his trust, his family, and the life he had almost stepped into without seeing the warning signs. And as the lights shimmered above them and the silence grew heavier, Daniel whispered for his son to tell him everything. Small cracks, big shadows in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Ethan noticed small things that at first felt too tiny to matter. Small cracks in the perfect picture everyone else saw. Moments that adults brushed off as coincidence, but that kept growing sharper in his young mind, until they formed a shape he could no longer ignore. It began one late evening when he went to get water from the kitchen, and heard Vanessa speaking in the living room with her phone pressed close to her mouth. Her voice low and rushed, the kind of whisper people use when they do not want anyone listening, and she said words like "trust me and he will sign it, and after the wedding everything will be clean." And though Ethan did not understand every piece of the conversation, something in her tone, a cold, tight tone he had never heard from her before, made him stand still behind the wall and listen with a thudding heart. When she noticed a shadow move across the floor, she ended the call in a hurry and smiled too quickly at Ethan, asking if he needed anything, acting gentle and warm as always. But Ethan walked back to his room with a strange feeling gnawing at his chest, a feeling that something about her was not real. Days passed, and Ethan tried to brush the feeling away, telling himself he might be imagining things because the house was changing, and the wedding preparations made everything feel tense, but little moments kept stacking together like puzzle pieces that did not belong in a normal life. One afternoon he saw Vanessa placing a small velvet box into Daniel's drawer. But when she left the room, Ethan opened the drawer out of curiosity and found that the box was locked with a tiny gold latch, a lock far too unusual for simple jewelry. And instead of leaving it alone, he lifted it and felt how heavy it was for such a small case. He put it back quickly, not wanting to be caught, but he could not forget the weight of it or the way Vanessa had looked around before hiding it. Then came the bracelet, a thin golden charm chain that Vanessa wore during a family dinner, delicate and sparkling under the lights. But Ethan's eyes caught a tiny engraving on one of the charms, 2 letters pressed into the gold, the initials AR, and when he asked casually what the letters meant, Vanessa smiled and said they were from a friend who made jewelry. She said it so easily, so smoothly, but Ethan noticed she did not look at Daniel when she answered. Later that night he searched Daniel's laptop for fun, scrolling through pictures the way he often did, and he found something that tightened every muscle in his body. A receipt tucked into the downloads folder, a receipt for an expensive bracelet with the same charm. But the name on the receipt was not Vanessa's real name. It was Anna Rivers, and Ethan stared at the screen until his heart began to race because he had never heard Vanessa use that name. He had never seen that name anywhere in their home. He tried to tell Daniel the next morning, but Daniel was distracted, smiling, excited, busy planning details for the wedding, and he brushed off Ethan's questions gently, assuming the boy was adjusting to the big change. Ethan felt a heavy frustration settle in his chest, not because his father ignored him, but because he realized adults rarely believe strange warnings unless they come from another adult. He thought of going to his teacher or calling the police, but he knew he needed real proof. Something solid that someone could not dismiss as a child misunderstanding grown-up situations. He told his Aunt Maya, and unlike everyone else, she listened carefully, her brows drawing together as she asked him to explain every detail slowly. Every suspicion, every small moment that had worried him. She did not call him silly or dramatic. She did not smile it away. Instead, she told him gently that sometimes children see things adults overlook because adults are blinded by hope or fear, and she told him to trust his eyes, but also to collect proper evidence because making an accusation against someone without proof could destroy a family. Her voice made him feel seen, and it sparked a determination inside him that surprised even himself. A sense that he had to protect his father no matter how difficult it would be. From that moment, Ethan began watching more closely, paying attention not like a child but like someone on a mission, seeing patterns instead of isolated moments. He noticed Vanessa leaving the house late in the evenings dressed in plain clothes and returning before dawn, with the same calm smile. He noticed her answering calls only when Daniel was away, and once when she thought she was alone he heard her say she would take care of it before the signed papers go through. The phrase haunted him for days, circling in his mind like a dark cloud, making him feel as if a countdown had begun and he was the only person aware of it. Then one Saturday afternoon, Ethan was riding his bike in the neighborhood when he saw Vanessa's car turning into a road that led away from town, a road he had never seen her take. Curiosity pulled him forward, and he followed at a distance until she stopped in front of a gated storage facility. She glanced around before typing something into the keypad, then slipped inside with a small box under her arm. Ethan hid behind a row of bushes, his heart pounding, feeling the air tighten around him as if he was witnessing something forbidden. When she came out 20 minutes later, she looked restless, checking her surroundings before hurrying into her car and driving away, without noticing the boy who remained crouched near the bushes with a growing certainty that something terrible was hidden behind those metal doors. Ethan stayed there long after she left, staring at the storage building and replaying every strange thing he had witnessed in the past weeks. He felt fear, but he also felt clarity, a sense that the cracks he had noticed were not accidents but signs pointing to a truth darker than he wanted to understand. He stood up slowly, gripping the straps of his backpack, and whispered to himself that he had to go back there, that he needed to see what she was hiding before the wedding day arrived and everything became too late to stop. And with that decision, his quiet life shifted into something far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. The storage unit. Ethan woke the next morning with a tight feeling in his chest, the kind that said the world had changed even though the sun still rose the same way. He ate breakfast quietly while Daniel talked excitedly about the wedding rehearsal, Vanessa smiling beside him, as if her life was a perfect painting untouched by secrets. But Ethan could not taste the food. He could not focus on their voices. His mind kept drifting back to the storage facility and the image of Vanessa slipping inside with that small, mysterious box. Every instinct in him whispered that he had seen something he was not supposed to see, something that explained every strange moment of the past few weeks. And the longer he waited, the stronger that whisper became until it felt like a shout inside his head. He knew he had to return before she moved whatever she was hiding or before she erased the trail completely. He told Daniel he was going to spend the afternoon at the park with his bike, and Daniel nodded distractedly because his phone kept vibrating with wedding updates. Vanessa watched Ethan with a soft smile and told him to be careful. Her voice sweet, but her eyes holding a flicker of something sharp, something alert, and Ethan hurried out of the house before she could ask any questions. The moment he rode away, he did not head toward the park, but toward the quiet road near the edge of town, pedaling fast, feeling the wind push against his face as he repeated a single thought in his mind. He needed answers, and he needed them before anyone got hurt. When he reached the storage facility, he parked his bike behind a row of bushes and peeked at the entrance, making sure no cars approached, scanning for Vanessa's silver sedan. The place looked calm, just a long row of metal doors with numbers painted above them, the kind of place people used to hide old furniture or holiday decorations, not secrets that made a 12-year-old boy's stomach twist with fear. Ethan waited a moment, letting his heartbeat settle, then crept along the fence until he found the spot where he had seen Vanessa enter the day before. A long keypad hung beside the gate, blinking softly, waiting for a code, and Ethan stared at it, wishing he could magically guess the numbers. But breaking in was impossible for him. He had already accepted that. What he needed was information, something he could see or record that would prove Vanessa was living a double life. He walked quietly toward the back of the building where the storage units formed a narrow alley. The metal walls reflected the sun and made the air warm and bright, but Ethan felt cold inside as he moved down the row until he found the unit he believed she had used. The door was green and old, with number 32 painted across it in faded yellow lines. The lock hung heavy just below the handle, and beside it were marks on the floor, small black streaks that looked fresh, as if the heavy door had been dragged open recently. Ethan pressed his ear against the cold metal, hearing nothing but the faint echo of his own breathing. He stepped back slowly, scanning the sides of the door, and then he noticed it. A tiny rectangular window tucked into the side of the unit, so narrow it could easily be missed. A dusty glass slot meant only for ventilation, but just wide enough for him to peek inside if he stood on something. Ethan's heart thudded as he looked around until he found an old concrete block near the fence. He dragged it quietly to the wall, wiped the dust from the window with his sleeve, climbed up, and pressed his eye against the glass. At first he could barely see anything. The inside looked dim and cluttered, shadows swallowing the corners, but then the shapes became clearer. Boxes stacked neatly against the wall, not the kind for storing old clothes, but heavy archival boxes with labels peeled off. A tall steel shelf rested against the back, holding binders arranged in perfect order, each with different last names written in black marker. Names he did not recognize, but names that looked too important to be random. Ethan leaned closer, squinting hard, and then he froze when he saw something that made his breath catch. On the shelf sat a small open binder filled with photographs. He pushed his face closer to the window, adjusting his angle, and his stomach twisted when he realized what he was looking at. Wedding photos. Dozens of them. The same woman in all of them. Vanessa, sometimes with a different hairstyle, sometimes with a different name printed on the back, sometimes standing beside older men, younger men, wealthy men, men who looked important, men who looked frightened without knowing why. Ethan felt his palms begin to sweat as he counted at least 5 different wedding photos, each with Vanessa smiling sweetly in a white dress, each with a groom who was not his father. His heart raced as he lifted his phone and snapped pictures through the glass, angling it to capture every detail, every name, every face. One photo had a small police incident sticker on the back, a number printed clearly, and Ethan snapped it too, knowing that this alone could lead someone to a truth bigger than anything he had imagined. He felt a cold chill slide down his spine as he wondered what happened to the men in those old photos, why their names were stored in boxes instead of memories, why Vanessa needed a locked storage unit full of identities. Suddenly he heard a car door slam outside the fence. His whole body stiffened. He ducked down behind the wall and held his breath, peeking carefully around the side. A tall man in a red cap stepped out of a black truck and walked toward the facility office. Not Vanessa, not someone he recognized, just a random customer, but Ethan's heartbeat was still hammering because he knew how close he had come to being caught. He stayed low until the man disappeared, then returned to the window for one final look. That was when he noticed something he had missed before. A small metal box on the floor below the shelf, half open, revealing passports with Vanessa's face but different names printed on each one. Different states, different birthdays, different lives she had lived without anyone noticing. Ethan's breath trembled as he took a photo of that too, and at that moment fear mixed with certainty inside him, forming a heavy truth he could not erase. Vanessa was not who she claimed to be, not even close. And whatever she planned for his father was not love, not happiness, but something dangerous and hidden beneath all her smiles. He climbed down from the concrete block, wiping the dust from his knees, and backed away from the unit slowly, carefully, knowing he held something that could change everything. His phone felt heavier in his hand, filled with images that proved his fears were real. As he walked back toward his bike, he felt a deep shaking inside him. Not from cold, but from the realization that he had stepped into a world he never should have discovered. But now that he had found it, he knew he could not run from it. He had to protect his father, and that meant the next step would be even more dangerous than what he had just done, setting the safety. Ethan rode home with a nervous fire burning inside him, each push of the pedal filled with the weight of what he had seen inside the storage unit. The images he captured replayed in his mind like scenes from a nightmare he could not shake away. The binders with strange last names, the wedding photos of Vanessa with different men, the passports that showed her living multiple lives, the incident number sticker that hinted at police trouble somewhere in her hidden past, everything mixed together into one terrifying truth. Vanessa was not just pretending to be someone she was not. She was planning something that could ruin his father's life, maybe even endanger it. By the time he reached his house, his heartbeat was thundering in his chest. But he forced himself to stay calm because acting scared would only make Vanessa suspicious. And suspicion was the last thing he could afford now. Daniel was in the backyard fixing some lights for the evening, smiling and humming as if the world was simple and happy, and Ethan's throat tightened because he wanted to run to him and tell him everything. But he could not. Not yet. Not without proof strong enough to break through the trust Daniel had placed in Vanessa. He walked past him and went straight to his room, closing the door softly. The quiet space made the weight of what he carried feel even heavier. He sat on his bed and opened his phone, staring at the photos until his stomach twisted again. He knew what he had to do. He needed to protect his father by making sure this information could not be erased, could not be deleted, could not disappear if something went wrong. The first thing he did was upload all the photos to a private cloud folder he created using a new password, a password he wrote down and hid under the carpet where no one would look. Then he emailed a copy of the folder to his Aunt Maya, attaching a small message that said, "Only read this if something happens, or if I tell you to." His hands shook as he pressed send because the message felt too real, too dark, like something a person would write before stepping into danger. After that, he took his school flash drive and transferred the pictures onto it, the one shaped like a small robot that his father had given him last year, and he placed it inside the front pocket of his backpack so he could carry it everywhere. He felt a strange comfort having 3 separate copies, as if dividing the truth made it harder for anyone to destroy. But he did not stop there. He opened his camera again and recorded a short video, holding the phone steady as he spoke. He explained everything he had seen in simple, clear words, his voice trembling only once when he described the wedding pictures that showed Vanessa with different husbands. He said the date, the time, the storage unit number, and why he believed his father's life was in danger. He did not know if anyone would ever need the video, but he made it anyway because something deep inside him warned that things would escalate quickly, and he needed a safety net strong enough to survive any storm. When the video finished uploading into the folder, he leaned back and breathed slowly, feeling both exhausted and strangely stronger, as if preparing for what came next was giving him the courage he needed. But then he remembered something else, something the operator at the non-emergency police line had said when he called late the night before. They told him that if he ever witnessed a crime or immediate danger, he must call 911 without hesitation. The memory of their calm voice echoed in his mind, giving him reassurance that he had someone to call if everything spiraled out of control. He spent the next half hour writing a message on a scheduled email app he found online, a message addressed to the venue manager and to Nick, his father's best man. In the message, he explained that if they were receiving this email, it meant something had happened at the wedding, and they needed to check the attached folder right away. Then he set the delivery time for 10 minutes after the wedding was supposed to begin, making sure that even if his phone was taken or destroyed, the backup plan would still activate. He stared at the schedule confirmation screen for a long moment, feeling the weight of being 12 years old yet planning as if he were preparing for a life or death situation. It made him feel older, sharper, more aware of how fragile everything truly was beneath its surface. A soft knock on his door made him jump, and when Vanessa called his name from the hallway, he felt a cold wave wash over him. He hid his phone under his pillow and forced his voice to stay steady as he answered. She opened the door and stepped inside with a gentle smile, asking if he was feeling okay because he looked tired, asking if he was adjusting to all the changes, acting as if she cared deeply about him. But Ethan saw something different in her eyes, something calculating, something that watched him too closely, and he realized she might be sensing that he was pulling away. He nodded quickly and told her he was fine, just sleepy, and she smiled again with that perfect expression she always used around Daniel. But when she closed the door and walked away, he noticed how quickly her smile vanished the moment she thought he could not see her, like dropping a mask as soon as the curtain fell. That night, Ethan could not sleep. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the evidence he had seen, thinking about the wedding happening in just a few days, thinking about how his father had no idea he was stepping into a trap. He wondered how many men before Daniel had believed Vanessa, had trusted her, had loved her without knowing they were just stepping stones in some hidden plan. He wished he could warn them too, but right now he had to focus on saving the person he loved most. As dawn approached, he finally drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, and when he woke up, he felt a new kind of determination settling inside him. He realized that gathering evidence was only the first step. The day of the wedding would be the real battle, the moment where everything would be revealed, and he had to be ready for whatever reaction Vanessa might have when confronted in front of everyone. He had to stay close to his father. He had to stay one step ahead. He had to stay brave even when his voice trembled. And as he sat on the edge of his bed, feeling the weight of the coming days, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The only way to protect his father was to expose Vanessa in front of everyone. And no matter how dangerous that moment became, he would not run from it. He would stand in the aisle and reveal the truth, even if the entire world watched him in disbelief. The unmasking in the aisle. The wedding day arrived with sunlight pouring across the city like a warm blessing, the kind of morning people believed promised joy. But for Ethan, the brightness only made the shadows inside him feel deeper. He stood in his room staring at himself in the mirror, his shirt neatly tucked in, his hair combed the way his father liked, but his eyes filled with a heavy determination that did not belong to a child. Today, everything would be decided. Today the truth would either save his father or destroy everything in a single moment. He took a slow breath, slipped the flash drive into his pocket, checked his phone to make sure the backup email was still scheduled, and whispered to himself that he had the proof. He had the truth. And he had to be brave no matter what came next. Downstairs, Daniel was adjusting his tie in front of the hallway mirror, smiling the way a man does when he believes his future is safe and bright. Seeing that smile made Ethan's stomach turn with a mixture of love and fear, because he knew that smile would fade the moment the truth came out. He knew pain was waiting just a few steps away for both of them. Vanessa appeared behind Daniel, placing her hand gently on his shoulder, her dress glowing like pure innocence, her expression soft and kind. And for a moment, Ethan understood why his father had fallen for her. She looked perfect, she looked harmless. But Ethan remembered the binders, the fake names, the other weddings, the storage unit filled with secrets, and the mask she wore now seemed like the most dangerous part of her. During the drive to the venue, Ethan stayed quiet in the back seat, staring out the window as the world rushed by in flashes of green trees and open sky. Daniel kept asking if he was excited, if he wanted a special seat, if he wanted to join the photos later. But Ethan nodded without speaking because he knew he had no place in the pictures of a wedding that would never happen. Vanessa turned in her seat once and smiled at him, saying she hoped he would enjoy the ceremony. But Ethan felt the temperature in the car drop a little when her eyes lingered too long on his backpack, as if she sensed something hidden there. He turned away, gripping the strap tightly, and prayed she had not figured anything out yet. When they reached the decorated hall, the guests were already taking their seats. Flowers lined the aisle, and soft music flowed through the air like a promise of happiness. Ethan stepped inside and felt his heart start pounding so hard he could hear it. He saw the big screen near the altar, the place where wedding photos and videos usually played, and he knew exactly what he would use it for. He walked slowly toward the front, pretending to admire the decorations while his mind counted every second, every breath, waiting for the moment when silence would fall and all eyes would be on his father. The ceremony began with calm voices, the officiant speaking gently, guests smiling. Daniel standing tall beside Vanessa as if he had found a new beginning. Ethan felt his throat close when the officiant opened the book of vows, because he knew the moment had come. He knew there was no going back once he stepped forward. He looked at his father one last time, wanting to hold on to the memory of him looking peaceful because what came next would shatter that peace forever. He took a deep breath, stepped into the aisle and spoke. His voice was steady even though his legs shook. Every head turned. The music faded. Daniel's smile vanished slowly, replaced by confusion, then worry and then dread when he saw the determination in his son's eyes. Vanessa blinked once, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second before she forced it back onto her face. Ethan walked all the way to the front and said he had something important to show everyone. Something his father needed to see before vows were spoken. Guests whispered in confusion, but Ethan did not look at them. He looked straight at his father and held out the flash drive. Daniel asked gently what was happening, but Ethan shook his head and said, "Please just trust me." He turned toward the venue technician at the corner and asked him to play the file on the screen, his voice trembling but loud enough for the entire hall to hear. The technician hesitated, unsure, but Daniel nodded toward him, and that small gesture gave Ethan the permission he needed. The lights dimmed slightly, the screen flickered to life, and the first image appeared. Vanessa in a wedding dress, but not the dress she wore today, smiling beside a man who was not Daniel. Gasps filled the room. Vanessa stiffened, her hands tightening around her bouquet as if she could crush it. The next photo flashed onto the screen. Another wedding, another groom, another name printed at the bottom. People murmured louder now, shocked, confused. Turning to Daniel with wide eyes, Ethan's recorded voice began to play over the slideshow, explaining calmly that he had found a storage unit with binders filled with identities, passports, photos, and documents linking Vanessa to multiple marriages under different names. The room fell into a stunned silence. Daniel's face lost all color. Vanessa stepped forward quickly, laughing nervously, saying the photos were edited, that someone was trying to sabotage her, that children imagined things, that she could explain everything. But her voice cracked near the end, a crack so thin yet sharp that it exposed her fear to everyone. Nick, the best man, stepped in front of her when she reached for the remote, blocking her hand firmly. His eyes narrowed as he stared at her, then turned to Ethan and asked if there was more. Ethan nodded slowly and added that there were also documents related to his father's accounts, hinting at will changes and financial transfers planned right after the honeymoon. The hall erupted in soft gasps again, and Daniel staggered back a step as if hit by an invisible blow. Vanessa looked around the room, her calm expression melting into something colder, something darker, something that told Ethan he had been right all along. She tried to speak again, but this time her voice no longer carried charm or innocence. It carried panic, and everyone heard it. And in that moment, before anyone could react further, Ethan felt the air shift, as if the truth hanging in the room had become heavier than the walls could hold. He knew the worst part was coming, the moment when the mask dropped completely, and the danger lurking behind her smile finally stepped forward into the light, the slip that says everything. The room held its breath as Vanessa stood frozen in front of the screen, her smooth smile collapsing one small piece at a time until it looked like a cracked mask, barely holding together. The evidence flashed behind her, one photo after another, each one cutting deeper through the illusion she had built around herself. People who had come to celebrate a wedding now stared at her, as if she were a stranger they had never truly seen. Daniel looked shattered, the light gone from his eyes, his hands trembling at his sides, and Ethan felt his chest tighten because watching his father fall apart hurt more than anything he had felt in the last few weeks. But he knew this pain was necessary. He knew truth was sometimes a fire that burned before it saved. Vanessa's breathing became fast and shallow as she scanned the room, searching for someone to believe her, someone to defend her, someone to pull her back into the safe world she had built. But the faces around her were filled with shock, confusion, suspicion, fear, and most importantly, disbelief. No one stepped forward. No one offered comfort. No one smiled back at her. And that was the moment when something inside her snapped. She turned sharply toward Ethan, her eyes cold and razor-sharp, and took a step forward in a way that made several guests instinctively straighten in their seats. She kept her voice low, trying not to make a scene, but her whisper cut through the hall because the officiant's microphone on the altar was still turned on. Every word she spoke flowed through the speakers, reaching every ear, exposing everything she wanted hidden. She told Ethan he should have stayed quiet. He should have minded his own business. He should have known better than to dig into things that adults keep separate from children, and that he had no idea what kind of trouble he had brought onto himself. The threat in her tone, sharp like a blade, echoed across the hall and made a chill run through every guest. Daniel jerked forward when he heard her voice amplified, disbelief turning into horror as he realized she had not even noticed the mic was catching every word. Vanessa stepped closer to Ethan and reached out quickly, trying to grab his wrist, her fingers tight and desperate, and she hissed that he ruined everything just like the last one who thought he could interfere. That single sentence fell into the air like a stone into a silent lake, sending waves of gasps through the room. The last one. People exchanged looks that carried unspoken fear. Daniel's heart felt like it stopped. Aunt Maya sprang from her seat, pushing past two guests as she pulled out her phone and began recording without hesitation, moving toward Ethan like a shield preparing to stand between him and danger. Nick stepped forward with her, blocking Vanessa's second attempt to reach the boy, his posture firm, his jaw tight, his voice low but clear as he told her not to touch him again. Vanessa's eyes darted around the hall, her calmness completely gone, her breathing uneven, her hands trembling slightly now that her secrets were exposed. The caterer, the same man who had been lingering near the exit earlier, stepped partially out from behind the curtain, glancing at Vanessa as if waiting for a signal. Ethan saw him move and felt fear crawl into his throat. He remembered hearing her whisper the day he followed her into the storage unit road, the voice that said she would take care of everything before the papers went through. He suddenly understood that Vanessa was not working alone, that there were people connected to her hidden life, people who did not want the truth to surface. Aunt Maya noticed the caterer too and raised her voice for the first time, telling him to stay where he was, her voice steady and strong, carrying the protective rage of someone who would not let harm come to her family. People in the crowd turned toward him whispering, shrinking back in their seats, sensing the growing danger. The caterer hesitated, his hands freezing, and then slowly lifted them slightly as if showing he had nothing. But the tension remained, thick and humming in the air. Vanessa turned back to Ethan, her voice shaking now, not with fear but with anger, with frustration, with the fury of someone whose carefully crafted world had crumbled in front of a room full of witnesses. She demanded to know how he had found her things, How he had discovered anything, how he dared to interfere in matters bigger than him. Her voice rose, and the guests flinched as her charm drained away completely, revealing the raw sharpness beneath it. Daniel stepped in front of Ethan protectively, his voice broken but firm as he asked her what she meant, asked her who the last one was, asked her what she had been planning to do. For a moment, Vanessa did not answer, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to regain control. But then she whispered something so quietly it sent a cold ripple through the entire hall. She said he was supposed to sign the papers. She said everything was supposed to happen cleanly. She said no one was supposed to get in the way. The weight of her words pressed down on the room like heavy fog, trapping everyone in a collective silence of horror. This was no misunderstanding. This was something criminal, something planned. Ethan felt his fingers trembling as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He did not wait for permission. He did not wait for an adult to guide him. He remembered what the officer told him on the non-emergency line. If someone is in danger, call 911 immediately. Do not hesitate. Do not wait. And in that moment, standing beside his father while a dangerous truth unfolded, Ethan realized he had no choice. His voice was small but steady as he pressed the emergency number and lifted the phone to his ear. The operator answered quickly, asking the location and the emergency, and Ethan spoke clearly enough for the entire hall to hear. He said they were at a wedding venue. He said someone just admitted to planning something harmful. He said his father might be in danger. He said they needed help right now. The guests gasped again, some covering their mouths, some clutching their seats. Vanessa froze, her eyes widening in horror as she realized the situation had escaped her control completely. Daniel placed a shaking hand on Ethan's back, pride and terror battling quietly in his eyes as he listened to his son's brave, steady voice. The operator asked him to stay on the line and confirm the address, and Ethan did, never looking away from Vanessa, never letting his courage slip even as his heart pounded painfully inside his chest. The hall felt like it had stopped breathing entirely. People whispered. Whispering turned into murmurs, and murmurs turned into frightened silence as everyone waited for what would happen next. Vanessa took one small step backward as if ready to run, but Nick and two guests blocked the aisle. The caterer tried to slip away, but Aunt Maya moved to the doorway, holding her phone up like evidence that could destroy him if he fled. Everything in the hall balanced on a thin edge of tension, and everyone knew what would happen next would change all their lives forever. Blue lights and new beginnings. The sound of distant sirens grew louder with every passing second, rising through the quiet tension inside the hall until it filled the space like a warning drumbeat, echoing through every heart. Guests sat frozen in their chairs, watching the doors with wide, fearful eyes, watching Vanessa with disbelief and shock, watching Daniel hold Ethan close as if he had just realized how close he came to losing everything. Vanessa stood in the center of the aisle, her hands trembling, her perfect posture collapsing into a posture of someone cornered, someone who had run out of lies, someone whose entire plan had just burned down in front of the world. For the first time since Ethan had met her, she looked small, not gentle, not kind, not innocent. Just small and exposed and trapped. The front door swung open as police officers entered quickly, their voices firm but calm, asking who had placed the emergency call. Ethan stepped forward, his legs still shaking but his voice steady, and told them it was him. He explained again exactly what happened, his words flowing smoother now because the truth had already been exposed, the fear already confronted. Daniel stood beside him, nodding slowly, his hand resting protectively on Ethan's shoulder, his face pale but carrying a new strength born from the shock and heartbreak of the last minutes. The officers turned to Vanessa and asked her to step forward slowly. She tried to lift her chin and compose herself, but the cracks in her mask were too deep now. One of the officers asked if she was known by any other names, reading off two from the binders Ethan had photographed, and the way her face tightened told everyone exactly what they needed to know. She began to speak, first trying to deny everything, then trying to twist her story into something harmless. But when the officers asked specifically about the storage unit, she paused for just a moment, a pause that sealed her truth more strongly than any confession. The caterer who had tried to slip away earlier looked like he wanted to run, but another officer stepped behind him and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. He stammered that he did not know anything, that he was just doing his job, but his nervous eyes betrayed him, and the officers separated him from the crowd. Aunt Maya handed her recording to one of the officers without hesitation, and Ethan watched the officer listen to the part where Vanessa admitted something was supposed to happen after the signed papers. That recording alone made the officers move with more caution, more seriousness, more urgency. They placed restraints on Vanessa's wrists gently but firmly, telling her she was being detained for questioning related to fraud, identity manipulation, and potential harm. She looked at Daniel one last time, her eyes filled with a mix of bitterness and defeat, and for the first time her voice cracked, not with charm, but with exhaustion. She said he should have trusted her. She said none of this was supposed to fall apart. She said the boy had ruined everything. But Daniel did not respond. He only looked at her with the hollow expression of someone who had just discovered that every warm memory he had held in his heart was built on a lie. As they escorted Vanessa outside, guests murmured softly, some whispering prayers, some shaking their heads, some looking at Ethan with newfound respect. The flashing blue lights from the police cars painted the entrance of the hall in sharp colors, making the entire scene feel unreal, like a movie playing in slow motion. The officers placed Vanessa in the back of a car, placed the caterer in another, and drove away, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were breathing again after holding too much truth inside. When the last siren faded, Daniel sank into a nearby chair, covering his face with both hands as the weight of everything finally hit him. Ethan hesitated, unsure if he should speak, but then he walked forward and wrapped his small arms around his father. Daniel pulled him close and held him tightly, his breath shaking against Ethan's hair, whispering that he was sorry, whispering that he should have listened, whispering that he did not know how close he came to danger. Ethan held him just as tightly and whispered that he only wanted to save him, that he could not let something bad happen, that he loved him too much to stay quiet. Aunt Maya joined them, placing her hand gently on their backs, her eyes soft and proud as she told Daniel that his son had shown more courage today than many adults would ever show in a lifetime. Daniel looked at Ethan with tears gathering in his eyes, tears not of sorrow but of gratitude, of relief, of deep, overwhelming love. He told Ethan he was his hero, and Ethan felt his heart swell with something warm and steady because for the first time since everything began, he felt safe. He felt seen. He felt strong. The guests slowly made their way out, offering quiet comfort, offering support, offering understanding. The wedding decorations, once symbols of joy, now looked like empty shells of something that had never been real. Daniel stood up slowly, looked around the hall, and then turned to Ethan with a tired but genuine smile. He said they were going home together, leaving behind everything that almost tore their lives apart. As they stepped outside, the sunlight felt different, softer, warmer, as if the world was welcoming them back after a long storm. Daniel placed his arm around his son while Aunt Maya walked beside them, and together they moved toward their car, not as broken people but as a family stronger than before. Ethan looked at the sky and breathed deeply, feeling the weight lift from his chest, feeling the sunlight on his face, feeling the truth settling into peace inside him. He had protected his father. He had protected himself. He had saved their future. Today had been terrifying, painful, overwhelming, but necessary. And now, for the first time in weeks, he felt free. The world did not feel dangerous anymore. It felt open. It felt new. And as they drove away from the hall, leaving behind the shattered pieces of a lie, Ethan leaned back in his seat and allowed his eyes to close, knowing that this chapter of their lives had ended exactly the way it needed to. The end.